I haven't heard from them all day, so I don't know.
All right, so we're gonna call the policy committee meeting to order at 6:31. We do have quorum. Thank you, Jen. I'm sure we got a couple of latecomers. All right, so if we start with item number 1, policies to rescind and replace. These were relatively straightforward. The first one is 3100.3 petty cash accounts, and the only change here was lines 10 to 11 is the amount. Shipment and Goodwin said we didn't need the policy, but if we use it, which we do, then we would keep it. So, and that was the amount that you came up with, right?
Yeah, we talked to the principals. They were fine with that. Hasn't been reviewed since 1997, so as you can imagine, with inflation, that's just going to keep us about where we are.
Okay, so any discussion on that?
No,
So we're just gonna keep moving here.
Yep.
The next one is 3130 money in school buildings. This is the same thing, the only change was line number 10, the amount of money changed, and that's the same.
Yeah, I mean, talking to the principals again, will be times it's even more so. So middle school's going to like compounds or something like that, $80 per student. And so you can imagine how quickly that adds up to $2,000. But they do try and go to the bank like every other day to do that on a regular basis.
Yeah, they did that. They were doing that every year until COVID.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're going again this year.
They're going again this year, and the cost of busing is so high. And that's been the struggle. But that, I know that's a big increase, but that's,
But I think
not as much.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable between fundraisers, field trips, you never know what's coming in on any given day, so.
Yes, and that's only one, grade level.
Right. All right, just catch you up, we just talked about 3100.3 petty cash accounts, where just the amount changed, and then 3130 money in school buildings, the amount changed, and then there's no other discussion on that.
Thank you.
Yep. So the next one is 3281, and I actually had a question for you, Dr. Cook.
Sure.
So 3281 is revised, it's much shorter than the current 3281, grants, gifts, and donations. It's now going to be called gifts, grants, and bequests to the district. So this is a significantly shorter one, and the only question I had was like on line 16. Well, first line 10 to 12, that refers to 3281R, right? Okay, which we'll get to. And then line 16, the way that it's worded, I was wondering if it should actually say something close to like only the superintendent of schools can accept gifts that are valued over $1,000, as opposed to must accept gifts. It sounds like it's a
For clarification, that works perfectly fine.
that was one of the things that I had a question on. And then the other one is so you kind of have to refer now to 3281R, because that's what this policy refers to. So 3281R, my only question is the difference between 3281, the old policy, and the new was, we've always voted on accepting the donations and gifts from different places, and that wording is removed from Shipman and Goodwin's. But if you look at the copy of our current policy on the second page, it says the Board of Ed shall approve all gifts of more than $1,000, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't know the thoughts of anyone here about keeping that in or not keeping that in. Seth, I want you to weigh in on that too as well. Just because we've always, since I haven't been on board that long, but we've always voted on accepting gifts, donations, etc. So I don't know if that was like Shipman and Goodwin didn't think it was necessary, or
It's not required. It's something nice that I think the board is aware of, so we want to make sure we keep that. It's completely up to the board. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion either way. It doesn't seem to slow meetings down. I think
I like it to keep it in, so we can just pop that wording back in. Because that was the only other change that I thought I would like, just because I think it brings the attention to the Board of Ed and to the public if they're watching. You know, that we are getting gifts or donations, whatever, and it just makes us aware, and then it's like something less that you can put in your note to us.
I think that's great too, because it gives us an opportunity to thank them.
Right. Acknowledge them and if there's any questions.
Yeah, and a couple of things. First of all, it's usually done as a matter of the consent agenda. So it's a very brief, we just kind of, someone acknowledges it and makes a thank you publicly. But secondly, there have been times when the board was confronted with potentially having to decline certain donations and that sort of thing. So it really is, it is a wise move, I think, for us to keep it in there and keep it in the consent agenda, keep it light and fast, but I do think it's something we should.
Okay, so then my question is that a revision that we would put into the 3281R or into the 3281, do you think?
I think the 3281 is the board policy.
Okay, so we'll just pop that in and then otherwise that and this, I also said in case you didn't hear, line 16, I just want to change the line to say only the superintendent of schools can accept gifts that are valued over $1,000, blah, blah, blah. Instead of the superintendent of schools must accept gifts.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any other comments or questions about 3281 or 3281R?
You'll give Wendy the new wording when you
I will.
want that? Perfect.
Yeah, I'll fix it. I know she got some. That brings us to policy 5141 and 5141R, the regulation. And this is formally 3280 fundraising. So the revised version is very short. The current older version wasn't that long to begin with, but it just had some more stuff that I don't think we needed in it. I believe if you look at the notes from Shipman Goodwin, they just said they recommended to repeal the policy and replace it and put it in the 5,000 series under students. It's pretty straightforward. If anyone had any questions about this one?
Comment on our,
Yeah, I want you to
Okay.
go first.
oh, sure. I would ask the board, I mean, I know this is a administrative reg, I issue it, but my intention would be to issue with the crowdfunding in there. I think it's important for us to know and have approval over that. We do when it's related to us. So if it's a Madison family that needs assistance, we just had one and that was a crowdfunding done by a friend. That's not in our purview, not really our issue. But had situations in the past where say a teacher decided to do crowdfunding as part of like a movement through CEA, the teachers union in the state, and kind of portrayed that they didn't get supplies from the district. And it was not received positively by the community who knew that they get lots of supplies from the district. So I just would want to have, some, I think it was very good intention, to get supplies to the students, but I think it's just important that if someone's going to put that, say, I'm a Madison Public Schools teacher and I want, I need $1,500 for my classroom, that we are aware of that, most likely would, decline that.
Okay,
That's just,
so we're gonna keep in the use of crowdfunding activity as it's written. You didn't want to change anything there.
no, I think shipping goods on language is good.
So then the 95 afterwards prohibition is gonna be removed. And then, so I have actually, that was one of my comments. And then the other one is, on the second page, on line 48 and line 54, it says, the request for prior approval for fundraising activity anticipated to raise funds up to, and then the threshold amount. So, what threshold amount are you going to put in there? Because I would like that, I think that should be set before we actually pass 3280, since 3280 refers to 3280R. Actually, 3280 is gonna be 5141. Yeah. So it'll be 5141 referring to 5141R. So we would need line 48 and 54 filled out. And then I don't think, in my opinion, I think we need the line 60 and down, the if decided part. That's up to you, you know, what you think. But you don't have to decide that now.
Yeah, if I can have some time to talk to the
Yeah.
principals, I think we haven't had that discussion. I imagine it's a relatively healthy amount, at least $500 or more, I would imagine. But if I can talk to the principals about that and get back to you,
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, we could still move forward with it, I don't think that's a major
even
hold up.
a car wash is gonna raise, you know.
Well, let's hope it raises lots of money.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so then my other question I actually had was, so under the handling of funds and record keeping, where is it?
109, 105 was the heading.
Yeah, I'm looking, I had a note in here, because our new the policy 3130 that we just discussed tonight about money in buildings, the maximum amount in the school buildings was $2,000, so I didn't know if that would impact this at all, because we just changed the amount, and so I didn't know, it's just a note
Okay.
to keep in mind, so if you needed to increase it or change it.
Okay.
But we're gonna go forward with the 3130, if you want to change it before it actually goes forward to the full board, that's fine, we can just change the number, it's not a big deal.
Right.
We can still vote on it and make it go forward.
But,
Okay. Anything else, does anyone have any questions or comments or anything about this policy, 5141 and 5141R? Yeah. All right, so now we're gonna come to the policies to rescind, and these should be very fast, so we're doing the time. Yes. Okay, so, so if you look at the policy notes from Shipman and Goodwin, it's very straightforward. The first policy is 4112.5, drug-free schools. Now, the only thing I would say with this one is the rest of the policies to rescind, I would like us to consider waiving the second read and having it go forward with a one read and becoming an action reading, which would have to be voted on by the board. But this is the only one under the policies to rescind that I would not recommend doing that to, because 4112.5 drug-free schools, if you rescind this policy, if you look at the notes, Shipman and Goodwin says, in light of policy 4116, which satisfies all the obligations of the Drug-Free Workplace Act, blah, blah, blah. And 4116 is later on in our agenda tonight. So that one is going to require the two reads. So therefore, this one should require the two reads as well. That's my only note on this one. Otherwise, again, Shipman and Goodwin says to just repeal this in light of policy 4116, which satisfies the obligations. Any other discussion about this policy? Right, move on. 4118.5, freedom of speech expression. Shipman and Goodwin recommends that we consider repealing it because of ever-changing case law generally guides freedom of expression by personnel in the school environment. So I have no problems rescinding this. Any comments or questions? Thanks.
You're so thorough, Diane, that's why.
You make it easy for
everything.
the rest of us.
Well, we're coming to the harder part, so that's why we're powering through this part, because the rest of it's gonna require some work.
The only thing I would say is, by rescinding this, we are relying a bit more directly on the superintendent and the administration to make sure that language in schools, you know, there's a balancing act. There's the First Amendment and the right to say your piece, but also the requirements of educational comportment, and just
Yes.
reasonable rules and, education disruption in the building. And I mean, I trust our administration to get that right. If there's ever a problem in the future, the board can always adopt a particular action item to deal with a particular issue or, something like that, but.
And honestly, the statutes change all the time, we might end up having to add it in later or something, but it just seems kind of.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out, but I think that it's fine to repeal it under
policy 4121, substitute teachers. Superintendent Goodwin recommended repealing this policy because it's addressed in the model policy employment of student teacher checks and in state law. Comments? Just jump in if you have one, otherwise we'll just keep going.
Okay.
All right, policy.
Well, actually,
Okay.
does this address, does repealing this allow the district to continue with the Belknap model that you're using for substitutes?
It does. The other thing it opens up, although we have not utilized because we've done the building model more so, is that you can file waivers with the state now for someone to substitute teach who had done that 4 years of college. And that could be used if we got a really bad situation. We prefer to keep that 4-year requirement. I think we certainly want the more mature subs that come with that as well. But we could have somebody say has a bachelor's degree, been out in other employment, and going back, that would allow us to file for the state to have that waiver. But I think for building subs per se, we like to have people working towards becoming a teacher. Because it's more guaranteed. We give them professional development. It's more guaranteed employment. Yeah, it's worked out okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
4122, student teachers and internship. Shipman and Goodwin recommend considering repealing this as the policy is unnecessary. Many of the issues are addressed through state law, and the state department has added rules governing teacher training programs, as well as any procedure the district maintains relative to student teachers.
Again, there's another one where it's nice for the board to have a statement that it favors internships and mentorships and that type of thing, but that can be built through the curriculum process. So I don't see it as a problem to rescind this.
I feel like, it's kind of a given that we support student teaching, teaching, but I kind of feel like policies that are just like statements that we support things, to me, seems like a waste of time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's not a policy that does anything or supports anything, or, it doesn't do anything, it's just like a statement.
Yeah, we're trying to get away from that and
Yeah.
clearing up the policies anyway, because
Right.
we used to do a lot of that, just like making a statement or having a big statement at the beginning of a policy and then going
Right.
into the actual policy rule. And
I think
that's
we have enough policies with all the
the mo-
statutes.
yeah, the modern version is to
Yeah.
get away from that.
Right.
I think we used Gaelic and Old English.
All right, policy 4126, consultants. Again, they recommend repealing it, it's unnecessary. And it's within the operational responsibilities of the superintendent to provide for consultative services. I'm gonna vote no anyway, so. 4135, organizational development, employee communications. Again, they say it's unnecessary and maybe repeal. This is another one of those statements that doesn't actually do anything. That's my note, says this policy doesn't do anything. And put a sticky on just for that. All right, 4140. I do have a question on this actually for you, Dr. Cook.
Sure.
So, they recommend review it and consider repealing it because it's the issues identified are addressed in the acceptable use policy. So what is the acceptable use policy that we have?
So students and teachers and all staff are given an acceptable use agreement where you sign off on it.
That's the technology agreement?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
so I don't think I've ever heard it called that.
Yep.
But I've signed that, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why they recommend repealing it if it's covered elsewhere. All right. So now we're up to 4211.1, affirmative action. These, recommend that we repeal the policy as it essentially replicates the non-discrimination policy.
I don't have a problem with that as a matter of just improving our policy, our board policies by trimming them down. I want to make very clear, however, on the record, that this does not mean that we don't favor non-discrimination policies. It's just that those policies already exist elsewhere.
Right, or multiple.
Yes, exactly, so that
Be another one.
we very much support non-discrimination policies and as we rescind this for procedural reasons.
And it is the law.
Right, and a major reason why it's concerning to have multiple policies covering the same thing when the list of areas where we don't discriminate against gets updated. Shipman tells us, and we update the other policies. This list hasn't been updated since 2006, which there's probably been at least 5 or 6 different updates since that time.
Yeah.
We missed something. We have missed something.
Policy 4212.42, drug and alcohol testing for school bus drivers. Shipman and Goodwin recommend that we repeal this policy as unnecessary. The policy provisions are required by statute, and the district's transportation contracts should include required drug testing, and a third-party bus company cannot be bound by policy unless required by contract. And we have a contract already in place, so we don't own our buses.
Right.
And we don't hire the bus drivers.
Correct. And didn't we have a policy that we looked at recently?
Something very
A couple
similar,
of months ago, that
yeah,
just said that we have to include
Yeah.
the law in our.
Right.
yeah, so if there is a
Statutory.
contract, then, you know, you abide by the contract, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
now this is the bulk of the issue. We're gonna actually save 1150 for last.
Okay.
That's my preference. So let's do 5090.7 actually first. And the reason for that is because we revised it so many times that it's like, it's nearly perfect. So let's just get to it. So one of the things that we did was to spell out certain things where it said CTS, we spelled out, Connecticut general statutes instead of CGS. So that throughout. So what we found was we had sort of in all 3 of these policies, sort of an inconsistency of where just sort of the flow of the document and how it read. And so we tried to move things around to keep all the definitions together and then the policy statements together. And then because we had discussed about the lack of the tobacco and inhalants in the one policy versus another policy, so we took them and added them in, but it wasn't so easy to cut and paste, so we actually had to work at it, which really sucked. So it took longer than expected and many revisions. So I like how this one came out, but I definitely would like some input. So the first paragraph refers to the unlawful use, sale, distribution, possession, controlled drugs, drug paraphernalia, and alcohol. And then we inserted from line 17 to 24 about tobacco, that our policy is to prevent and prohibit the use of, and we included every possible form of tobacco, as well as the vapor delivery systems. And also made sure that it included that it was not allowed on transportation or any school-related activity. And then we added in the ongoing support clause. And then on line 32, we added the one inhalants. That's from our old policy. We carried it over because Shipman and Goodwin had not included it. And so formerly this 5090.7 was called drugs, alcohol, tobacco, inhalants, and performance enhancing substances. But now we want it to be called drug, alcohol, tobacco, and inhalant use, because performance enhancing substances is covered under a different policy. It's under the athletic, the one that we just did last meeting. All right, so so the inhalants goes from line 32 to 53. Then we did the definitions, and spelled out Connecticut General Statutes, made sure that we added in the tobacco and tobacco products definition. And we made sure to include athletic trainer under professional employee on line 96 to 100. And then we added in, we changed the definition of school property so that it would be consistent from policy to policy. So on the athletic one and the 3 tonight, they're all gonna say the same thing. They have the same phrase. So in this one, it's number 7 from lines 102 to 105. And then there's the definition of school-sponsored activity, and then we have the inhalants, and we took that from the previous policy and just sort of framed it as more of a definition. I think those were the changes, the rest of it is unchanged. So that was the major overhaul of that, so I want to make sure that everyone's happy, that it covers everything that we need, that was in the former policy, and all the changes that were required by statute with respect to the Connecticut General Statutes on drugs, alcohol, and marijuana. I think that's in here too.
I've got a question on the line 142 to 146, professional employees. So they're permitted in their professional judgment to disclose any information required through a professional communication with a student when such information concerns alcohol or drug abuse or any alcohol or drug problem of such student. In no event, however, will they be required to do so.
That's
Are
a general
we-
statute.
Is that specific to drugs and alcohol? Because I know for social emotional issues, they're mandatory reporters. I just don't want to give an impression that we're violating any. Should we double check that just to make sure? I mean, I'm sure, well, if this has already been through Shipman and Goodwin, then they must have already looked at it.
So when I had read the other policies as well that had the exact same paragraph in it, it was if the student comes forward and tells you it's treated as confidential information, and they are not required to do that. But if it's by another party and someone tells them and then they find the paraphernalia, et cetera, then they must report it. So and that also had a general statute listed with it. So, and I'm, sort of assuming that Shipman and Goodwin, because they worded it that way, that it's by statute. But
I mean, it's a little confusing because the search and seizure requires immediate reporting. But I guess if someone voluntarily says that I'm just having a problem, but there's no, I mean, would that lead someone to automatically suspect that they might have paraphernalia? And in that case, are they required, mandated to? I don't know.
I think it's meant to be so that if a student says, okay, so I have, XYZ, and I don't want to use it anymore, and I'm letting you know that I have it, that they're not immediately punished for it by seizing it, and you know what I mean, because they're coming forward asking for help.
It's kind of like an employee assistance program where if you
Self-report.
self-report,
Self-referral.
self-referral, you have certain options available to you as opposed to you show up to work inebriated. It's like, okay, well, now we're going down a different path.
Yeah, but the way I'm reading those two juxtaposed against each other, if someone there's a difference between self-reporting that, hey, I drink too much, generally,
Right,
versus I have a bottle of vodka in my locker,
right.
right? If they say I drink too much and I have a bottle of vodka in my locker, that triggers the mandatory reporting and seizure, doesn't it? Because then they have reason to suspect that there's paraphernalia in the student's
I think
possession.
we need clarification on it because I'm getting that same sense.
Yeah, I mean, because I think like if somebody approached me and said, I'm having a problem with using alcohol or using drugs, I wouldn't immediately suspect that they had it on their person
Right, or that they're storing it in
or that they're storing it in the school. That wouldn't be my first assumption.
But if they say, in
But if they
self-reporting, if they say
said-
it, then, the only difference between those situations where you wanna give them support because
Right.
they've admitted they have a problem
Right.
versus getting them in trouble and throwing the book at them.
Right,
The only difference is when they self-reported, they mistakenly also said, and by the way, I've got a pint of vodka in my locker. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I don't know if we want to,
Possession is covered under the voluntary disclosure. So it's, concerning students' use, possession, distribution, and sale of. Okay, so.
yeah,
so if it's self-reported, even if it's present in school, then they can use the professional
I think
staff
the premise
can use
there,
their judgment.
yeah, I think the premise there is that they're coming forward for help. And so you want to help them, and if they're turning something over to you, it's because they're getting rid of it.
But then
Right.
look at 148 onward. Any physical evidence obtained from such student through a professional communication
That's about a
indicating that a
crime.
crime has been or is being committed must be turned over. So any underage drinking, for example,
It's a crime, yeah.
that's a crime. Or underage possession is a crime as well.
Yeah, I find it confusing, and it's concerning that if it's confusing to us, that a student may think that they can disclose that, asking for help, and then end up in a lot more trouble than expected.
No case where will be such employee be required to disclose the name of the student with the evidence obtained. So in the vodka example, you gotta give the vodka bottle to the administration within 2 days, but you don't have to say where you got it from.
So I guess that still carries through where if they're not reporting the name of the student, then there's not gonna be any consequence.
Because I think the key here is that it's considered professional communication information, it's sort of, confidential.
And how is that communicated to our professionals? If we had to read it and think about it
Sure.
in 6 different
Yeah,
ways, they
right.
probably will misunderstand it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So anytime a new policy is communicated or passed, we meet with the administration, we review it, and then they go back and review it at faculty meetings.
Right. Well, and it does even say in line 158 through 161, any professional employee who has received a professional communication from a student may obtain advice and information concerning appropriate resources and refer the student accordingly, subject to the rights of the professional employee as described in paragraph A above.
The student needs to consent to disclosure from that professional communication to the building's administrator. That's next, 163 to 168.
Yeah, and that's for name reporting.
Right.
Is this used as a tool, where if an administrator feels that a student would benefit from therapy or some outside, courses or whatever, even if it didn't start as a professional communication, can it sometimes become a professional communication to try and help that student on their way? Like if they get busted with something,
Yes.
does it become, well, I think I have a drinking problem, and then you can convert it from behavioral adjustment to therapeutic intervention?
Not to my knowledge. I view this more as the students meeting with a social worker or something, and they're talking about
And affirmative.
how things are going, and they say, well, I'm depressed and I've been using X, Y, and Z, and then that's how that comes up, in the course of the conversation. I think if it's gotten to the point, in your description, I think it's too late.
Or it gives students an opportunity to feel that they can go and seek help without punitive repercussions. I think it encourages those open lines of communication for them to know that there's a reasonable.
I mean, this is a policy that sits in our dusty tome. And, you know, there are staff interventions to teach staff about how this should work and can work to the benefit of students. I wonder if it makes sense to also publicize to the students a little more clearly. I mean, especially with the results we've had. The substance abuse isn't as bad now as it was before COVID. It's more socio-emotional without drugs and alcohol involved. But I just wonder, as a general matter, if we can do something to make this like more obvious to the students and also let them know and be encouraged that, but we'd have to be careful to let them know, don't hang yourself by coming with a bottle in your hand.
Right.
You know? But if you have a problem, feel free to talk to, you know, you should feel comfortable talking to professionals without feeling like there will be a behavioral response. Or, you know, a conduct response,
Right.
but that's, you know, that's a different
I
matter.
think we're all on the same
Did-
page in that
Yeah,
regard.
did Shipman and Goodwin review this whole policy, or did they just review the portions that we sought to add?
No, they actually, what we added in about tobacco and inhalants
Into
was
their
after,
policy?
yeah, they had the policy, they incorporated their policy into ours, and then we added to it from our previous policy that they left out.
And did they look again at this one and find it to be okay with the additive language?
No, they did
Further
not look at it.
revisions included?
No, because these came from our previous policy.
Yeah, but none of the changes have to do with those provisions that I'm questioning.
No,
So,
those are straight from
Okay.
Shipman and Goodwin.
I mean, I think we have to assume that those provisions are okay the way they're stated. I think maybe it does make sense at some point to see if we can let students know
I mean,
that if they have problems, they can
trying
talk
to
to adults,
remember,
not get
yeah.
in trouble.
But I mean, there's, I know that CAN does something, trying to remember what they did. You know, like when they have their Wellness Wednesdays and
Pause,
stuff, yeah,
yeah.
the pause, like sometimes they have like the 30 minutes where they talk to them about something. So we could probably figure out a way to incorporate like how to ask for help. I mean, all the students are aware that there are school psychologists and social
Yeah.
workers there and guidance counselors.
Mass
But then-
family services.
Right,
Yep.
but maybe some better publicity about how to utilize them, how to access them,
Sure.
or just a reminder even.
During a pause session, and maybe even, I would say at Polson as well.
And this
Right.
might actually be
Yeah, I
timing
would
with
agree with that.
prom coming up,
Yeah.
a little reminder.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
think they actually do it, use the pause group
they
as a
do.
reminder session before prom and before graduation.
Oh, do they?
Like, be careful.
Yeah.
Your things get busted for, you know, so don't be that person. Yeah, yeah.
All right, so
Okay, so
with regards to the rest of the changes, is everyone happy with the inclusion of all the tobacco, inhalants, and the other changes?
Yes, I'm very happy with that.
Yeah.
So then,
That's very thorough, thank you. I think I learned a few words.
I think I drove Wendy crazy going through this policy, but wait, there's more. So now we're gonna do 4116. So, we didn't actually get to revise this exactly in how I wanted it to. Let me just look for my note. Oops. We did include the exact same definition from the last policy, 5090.7, to this policy, 4116. The difference is the 5090.7 is for students, this is for personnel. And we use the same definition of school property. So we had made that change, and we also, I think we moved around the definitions. And then we added in a more inclusive and descriptive description of tobacco and tobacco products. So if you look at the changes that were made, it's from lines 36 to 43. And so the only thing, I think that, yeah, this one's okay. Because we do have under definitions, school property. So school property is mentioned on line 38. And it says including property owned, leased, contracted for, or utilized by the board or any school sponsored activity at any time. And then later on, you see school sponsored activity has a definition. Any areas? No, okay, so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to add in under definitions, just the definition of school property again, because it's not actually listed on this one. And that was the only change that I wanted to make on this, not the other changes. Was that confusing or did that make sense?
No, that makes sense. But I have a couple questions.
Certainly.
First of all, in lines 36 through 46, the definitions. Are we overreaching a little bit to the point where this would prevent a teacher, faculty, staff, whatever member from using the patch to recover from, nicotine addiction? Or
I think
you know,
that's considered
nicotine
a
chewing
medical,
gum?
but that, I think that would fall under like medical use.
But there's no, is there a medical, which only prescription for?
And those are over the counter.
Yeah, they're over the counter now.
Were you thinking, Seth, that like in line 41 where it mentions nicotine delivering devices, is that what you were thinking of in terms of like the patch or the mints or the gum? Yeah, that kind of popped into my mind too as I scanned over that.
I mean, I can think of a way of handling this at the end of the sentence, just say, notwithstanding the foregoing, this does not prevent
Smoking cessation.
smoking cessation aids,
Aids or
Okay.
nicotine cessation aids or however you would.
nicotine-based smoking cessation aids.
How many more words can we put in?
I will talk to Wendy
Yeah.
because she is the word guru.
Yeah.
But I think that's an easy fix.
Yeah,
By staff,
yes,
Right.
because that's under
Okay.
personnel. Yeah.
I mean, they're not gonna like have,
Yeah.
patches all over their body, but within reason.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I question is, and this was not part of the change, but just locking out the hood open. Line 49, because marijuana use is still prohibited under federal law, the use of marijuana at work or outside of work, if it impairs the employee's ability to perform their job, constitutes a violation of this policy. I would advocate for taking out the clause because marijuana use is still prohibited under federal law, because it may not be prohibited under federal law for long. And I think we would still probably want staff to not, be intoxicated with marijuana while at work.
So that was like one of the changes that specifically came from Shipman and Goodwin. And I think that if federal law changed, then I think all the statutes would change and we would have to change it anyway.
right, I would prefer to leave.
I think,
Yeah, this just gives a nice justification as to why, so it
Right.
makes it more clear.
because
The
state
problem
versus
is,
federal.
but the problem that I see, and the reason why I'm advocating for this, and we don't have to adopt it, is because I anticipate that it will be removed from federal law. And I don't want there to be a big outcry when it is, and people say, all this, some of the staff come and say, oh,
Well, is
your
there-
reason for having this policy is no longer valid, so we're now allowed to,
Are there,
or we should be allowed to,
anything, is there anything in the contract that stipulates against, in the teacher contract, that stipulates against drug usage?
No, but what is happening is marijuana is being treated more like alcohol, and so alcohol is prohibited as well.
Right, it's
during the
legal,
day.
but
Right.
not
Right.
legal during the working day.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
and that's why you have to stress that it impairs the employee's ability to perform their job. I think it's a stronger statement that stands the test of time to just say, we don't want people being high while they're working here.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because we don't, and think it interferes with the presumption is it interferes with the instructional process and the learning
Right.
environment,
Yeah,
rather than just because federal law says so.
yeah, we wouldn't want people misusing prescription drugs, marijuana, alcohol, anything that would impair their abilities.
So again, I'm not trying to create a problem where there isn't one, but at the same time, I can foresee there being one. I mean, on the other hand, who really pays attention to these meetings? If you're gonna remove it one day, I don't anticipate a run of staff with pitchforks and-
Right now.
what's that? There are what?
I said, we probably have 45 people on this meeting right now. You
I
never
think,
know.
I think I prefer to leave it the way Shipman Goodwin has now, and I think that much like every other policy, it's gonna end up having some sort of statute change, or we're gonna have to revise it anyway. So, and then they'll
Yeah,
have,
no, we'll deal with
then
it.
we'll have some other sort of,
Yeah.
wording that will be appropriate for that particular time.
That's fine, I just wanted to raise
Is
that.
everyone okay with that?
Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
I'm trying to get away with that, honestly.
So you'll just try and come up with some language about smoking cessation.
Yeah. I mean, what I can
Stuff
do
being
is,
accepted from this.
you tell me if I can do this, 'cause I think that I can. If I send an email to the committee, but you don't reply all back to me, it's not a meeting, but if you have a problem with the way that the wording is, then you contact me. Does that work? You want this, okay. All right, so now we get to 11:50, and now we get to talk about why I have problems with policy 11:50. All right, we have 13 minutes to tackle this one. So what I did was I looked, so policy 1150 is community school relations. And we did, try to, just like the other ones, fix the definitions of tobacco and smoking, blah, blah, blah. And then I sort of realized that when you look at our policies, in the section 1000 series, under community school relations, the only policy that regarding banned substances in that series is this smoking policy 1150. And within this policy, it alludes to controlled substances and cannabis under the definition section, but it actually doesn't specifically ban them. So there's actually nothing in our policies and the community school relations that specifically bans the use of illegal drugs, controlled substances, cannabis, or alcohol within the community section. It's banned for students under 5090.7 and for personnel under 4116, but nothing for the public. So my suggestion is to review this and think about possibly extending this. So it's not just a prohibition against smoking and tobacco and cannabis, but to extend it so that we make sure the community knows that we don't want them to have illegal drugs and controlled substances, alcohol, all that, the same way that we do for personnel and students.
I think that's a fair point, because I know that even came up a year or two ago about the picnic area at Surf Club during sporting events, and how people would have like tailgates over there, but it was happening in conjunction with
Friday night.
like a Friday night football.
Right, so then
game.
are they actually part of the school sponsored event, the game, or are they part of Surf Club? Is that what they were?
Well, and I believe signs were going up at the time, just reminding people like, hey, if you're like from here to here, so to speak, no alcohol allowed. So I'm not really sure how it was handled per se, but I remember it was an issue that arose.
Yeah, we talked about that quite a bit because it's really a gray area in terms of that whole area down there. And I know that there's been issues before with younger students running around outside the stadium, and are we in charge? Parents should be in
Right.
charge, but is it a police matter, or how does that work? Because we have our hands full with what's going on inside the game area.
Right.
So we've actually talked about that quite a bit. So I think that would be a town issue outside the gated area for that, because because it wouldn't happen, like you said, it wouldn't happen on school grounds, what you described.
No, yeah, that's,
Do that
it's
on
that one very specific spot.
Right.
I suppose one thing we could do is to say that folks trying to enter, events, school community events,
Can't be
who are
under the
clearly
influence of-
intoxicated, maybe turned away.
Yeah,
I mean, and then, we should have police present in case someone gets unruly, but
Has any of that been an issue? So I've been around a long time and I haven't seen that. Yeah.
Not the alcohol, from my knowledge, but the younger kids' behavior issues happening outside. I think there was a storage area that was broken into one of the games in the fall. Kids would go play basketball and get hurt or get knocked out or something like that. And that's, it's tough for us because parents come into the game, maybe the older kid comes into the game, but the fifth graders out there playing, and like I said, we've got our hands full.
So that kind of issue I've heard a lot.
Yeah, right.
That's been going on for a very long time.
Yeah,
But I don't know how we can control parents' behavior, and I would hope, I haven't seen that, so I would hope that isn't an issue. But even if we put it in the policy, how do we
enforce it?
right.
I mean,
Well,
people
my
are gonna
intent,
tailgate.
my intent for this was just because, there's not, first of all, there's not very many policies in the community section to begin with. But in general, we do not want the community to be on school property intoxicated, under the influence of any sort of altering substance, et cetera. But yet we have no actual policy against it, but we have the policy for our employees, our staff, and we have the policy for our students. And so I feel like as an extension of that, to be consistent, it should be well known that obviously we don't want the community, impaired on our property.
right.
We should actually, put it into our policy.
Well, but see, when we start policing what they're, ingesting off of our property and coming onto our property intoxicated, that could, that's a slippery slope. I mean, do we,
But that's not what
the law
I'm
is
saying.
intended to,
You cannot use it, you cannot have it on our property. And that is actually not in our policies. And I think it may have been, and maybe I don't know what happened to it, I don't know. But I know that we don't have it now because I went through the 1000 series. But yet we are very specific about whether you can have it or use it or be under influence of it for our staff and for our students. And I feel like, in the same way, we should be having the same rules for the community that comes onto our property because it is still the school property and
well, yeah, it's easier to police, I guess, if it's a soccer game at the Daniel Hand turf field as opposed to down at Strongfield.
Yeah.
Because then
Strongfield's-
clearly you're in the Polson parking lot.
yeah, I think,
Yeah.
Strongfield is a completely different
Yeah.
Yeah,
the ballgame.
That's right, yeah.
That's all we did.
Yeah.
It's a student, it's a behavior issue that we can address, and if it's an employee, that's again, a personnel issue. But what would we even do if it is a parent? Just
Well-
ask them to leave? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if
That-
the
that-
parents acting unruly on
Right.
school grounds.
We typically do have police officers at those events.
yeah, and
The
I
other thing is-
imagine that would happen anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
We wouldn't be able to do a lot beyond that unless we got.
Well, I mean, as it stands now, if you have a parent on school property who is smoking, we would tell them, you're not allowed to smoke on school property. So either they have to get rid of it or they leave. And so I think it would be the same for anything else. You can't come onto school property and drink your six-pack of beer because it's not allowed. But we don't actually specifically state that in
Right.
our policy.
it's like there's an understanding that you shouldn't do these things, but we don't have the policy in writing to back it up.
Right, and I think it's pretty well understood that we don't want our students drinking either, but yet we have a policy for that.
Yeah.
So in the same,
Yeah, we want, maybe a policy that says, for the, that addresses modeling good behavior for our students, but also to preserve the safety of our students.
honestly, I don't think we even need to say why, it's a given. You're on school property, just like you don't have a firearm on school property, because we have a policy for that. But in this particular policy, number 1150, for the prohibition against smoking, we are specifically saying you can't vape, you can't use any sort of tobacco products, you can't use cannabis, but we don't actually address other controlled substances, illegal substances, alcohol, And I think it's an oversight. So my suggestion would be to minimally add it, but add it.
But what about the situation where, I mean, people are permitted to consume alcohol at the surf club, right? You just have to use plastic and not bottles and that.
But not at a game.
Well, but the surf club is open till sunset, and the games start before sunset, some of them in the spring and the fall. So, like, I wonder if adopting a policy that seeks to assert control over an area that is not owned by the,
I don't think we're trying to see
But we're not talking
control
specifically about
over,
like the,
We're talking about
picnic
school
area.
property. We're talking about our athletic fields, our school buildings, our administrative buildings, school grounds, school buses.
So it wouldn't apply to the surf club.
so it wouldn't apply to the.
right, to strong field.
Except within the
Within,
playing
Within
area,
the gated
yes.
area.
within the gated area of Strongfield.
Right.
Right, you're taking-
so the other changes I thought, this is just minor, it's just to move, on page 2, 44 to 51 is policy about tobacco. I think we should move it underneath the first paragraph to like line 11. So that the definitions are all together. And then same with lines 59 to 61 about prohibiting the smoking and electronic cannabis delivery system. Again, to move all of the actual policy language to the beginning, followed by all the definitions. And that was just sort of like housekeeping.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, so then we have two options. We can make those minor adjustments that I have said just for housekeeping and move it forward and keep discussing whether or not we want to have a new policy or if we wanted to tack it on to the smoking, or we can delay this one.
Well, we should also change the title.
Right, well, we got 2 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, do you wanna, maybe we should
The
go ahead
only,
and make those changes
Yeah.
and circulate it for readings and see if it sparks any additional interest from board members who may bring up similar issues that we brought
we
up.
could also, talk again to Shipman and Goodwin and see what their feelings are on it.
Yeah.
But the only reason I would suggest making the small housekeeping changes and pushing it through is because of the cannabis language, and that was the main reason for the change. It has to do with Connecticut statutes.
Yeah.
And so then we would be in compliance with that, and then if we want to revise it again, we can, but that's like a big, it's a big change. And so we could talk to Shipman and Goodwin first, to see what their recommendation is, to have a separate policy, or to, like we did with the other ones, kind of tack everything under that.
Right.
Smoking and alcohol and this and that. But we could just send this one through now so that we are in compliance with the statute.
And whatever we do to add cannabis type of stuff, we should have Mary Ann bring that information as liaison to the marijuana committee, the cannabis.
Oh, yeah, the town can see.
All right, so,
Because it's a matter that might be a matter of interest for, education for town members.
Yes, that's important.
all right, so, we'll do like one big vote. We're going to, take policy 3100.3, 3130, 5141, and move those forward for the rescind and replace, and those will take the two reads. 3281 will change that wording, that we had discussed, and also move that one forward. So those will be for the regular, 2 reads. So, that's the one part of the vote. Then the next one is to recommend the waiving of the second read, and move the policies to rescind forward of 4118.5, 4121, 4122, 4126, 4135, 4140, 4211.1, 4212.42, and also move on 4112.5, but not to be waiving the second read. Follow that, okay? And then we're going to recommend 5090.7 to move on for the 2 reads, and make the small changes for 4116, which I'll make sure that everyone's happy with, but we'll move that one forward as well for 2 reads. And then 1150, just with the minor housekeeping changes. And move that one forward as well, and we'll, I'm sorry?
That would be one read.
Yeah.
If that- yeah.
Yes. The only ones that will be waiving the second read will be, under the policies to rescind, not including 4112.5.
Yeah.
So I need a motion for that.
Motion.
Second, thank you, all in favor? Aye, okay. And now I need a, motion to adjourn.
Motion